They walked into court arm in arm like a family. I walked in alone with a folder that could end all of them. The baby wasn't the twist. The payroll ghost was. They said I'd pay for their new family. I agreed, just not the way they expected. My name is Noelle Hart. On paper, I am 33 years old and the founder of Riverton Scaleworks, a consultancy that streamlines chaos for other businesses. In reality, I am a creature held together by routine and very good tailoring. My voice, when I speak to clients, is measured, calm, but inside, there is a hairline fracture running through the bone, a slow, internal bleed that no one sees. If you are to understand what I did, you must first understand the room I grew up in. I was born into the destiny of the eldest daughter. It wasn't a role. It was a job description I never applied for. A weight placed on my shoulders the moment my sister, Savannah, was born 2 years later. My entire childhood was a chorus of Noelle, watch your sister. Noelle, clean that up. Noelle, you know better. Savannah was born to be watched, to make the messes, to not know better. Our parents, Evelyn and Charles, didn't just enable her, they curated her childhood. They were the architects of her softness, and I was the load-bearing wall that allowed them to do it. The memory that defines it all smells of dust and shattered porcelain. I was 10. I was in the kitchen, 3 rooms away, meticulously finishing my math homework. Savannah, 8, was trying to climb the antique credenza in the living room to get at the hard candy my mother kept hidden in a decorative tin. The Ming-style vase, my mother's absolute pride. A gift from her own mother, was balanced precariously on the edge. I remember the sound, a sharp, crystalline crack followed by the wet spray of water and petals across the hardwood floor. The silence that followed was louder than the crash. It was a vacuum, waiting to be filled by my mother's voice. Evelyn didn't run. She walked in, her heels clicking a sharp, angry rhythm on the oak. Her gaze swept past Savannah, who was frozen mid-climb, 1 foot dangling. It swept past the glittering blue and white debris. It found me, standing in the kitchen doorway, textbook still in my hand. Noelle Ann Hart. Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. I told you to watch her. Why didn't you stop her? I was doing homework. I didn't even see. You were supposed to be watching. Supposed to be. The 2 heaviest words in the English language. It didn't matter that I wasn't there. It didn't matter that Savannah was the one who climbed. In our family, there were 2 types of transgressions. There was Savannah's, and then there was mine. The sin of omission, the crime of failing to prevent the inevitable. Savannah was disciplined with a sigh and a hug. I was disciplined with a lecture on responsibility that lasted until dinner. I was guilty for not sinning. This set the unwritten rules of our household. When Savannah threw a tantrum, skipped school, or broke something of value, it was because she was sensitive or passionate. When I expressed disagreement or pointed out a logical flaw, I was rigid, cold, or difficult. Why do you have to be so difficult? Noelle, my father, Charles, would ask, sighing, as if my adherence to logic was a personal burden on him. He was a man who preferred comfort above all. And Savannah's volatility was a familiar storm, while my composure felt like a judgment. You learn to adapt. If logic is rigid and responsibility is a given, then the only defense is flawlessness. Perfection became my armor. It was heavy, insulating, and polished to a high sheen. I welded it shut with straight A's. I reinforced the joints with 5-year plans laminated in my desk drawer. While Savannah was discovering boys, missing curfews, and expressing herself with bad poetry, I was working double shifts at a 24-hour diner. The smell of stale coffee, industrial bleach, and burnt toast became the scent of my freedom. I wasn't just saving money, I was building a fortress. Brick by meticulous, exhausting brick. You cannot be blamed if you are immaculate. My armor was opaque to everyone except Great-Aunt Lillian March. Lillian was my mother's aunt, a woman who moved through the world with the quiet authority of old money and an older mind. She wore starched linen shirts in winter and smelled like Earl Grey tea and sandalwood. While my parents saw my achievements as expected or slightly intimidating, Lillian saw me. Our afternoon teas, once a month, were a sanctuary. She lived in a small, sun-drenched bungalow across town, filled with books that reached the ceiling. The air was always warm. "They mistake your structure for rigidity." "Noelle," she said one crisp October afternoon, pouring amber liquid into a cup so thin I feared it would break under my grip. "They are wrong. Structure is how you build empires. It's the trellis. Child, you are the vine." The steam from the cup warmed my hands, which always seemed to be cold. She was the first person to use a word like empire in the same sentence as my name. She listened to my nascent dreams of a business, not just a job, but a system I owned, a company that helped other companies fix their broken processes. She treated my 5-year plans not as a teenage eccentricity, but as a blueprint. "Don't you dare dull yourself," she'd say, her voice like dry leaves. "Your mother, Evelyn, she is afraid of sharp edges, and you, my dear, are all focus. It frightens her." It was more than encouragement. It was oxygen. The first real crisis came when Savannah was 19. She vanished, leaving only a note on her unmade bed about finding herself with a musician whose name no one could quite remember. The finding lasted 6 months and involved 3 states, a broken-down car, and a significant amount of credit card debt racked up in my parents' names, which, of course, they hadn't noticed. It wasn't just the money, it was the screaming matches, the late-night calls from Charles demanding I talk sense into her how. When I didn't know where she was, the sheer gravitational pull of Savannah's chaos sucking all the air out of our lives. When she finally crash-landed back home, 20 pounds lighter, hollow-eyed and silent, I was the one who sat at the kitchen table with the collection agencies. I was the one who drained my diner savings, the money earmarked for my first business license, to keep their credit from imploding. My parents called it helping. I called it cleanup, the cleanup operation. Savannah cried about her trauma. I handled the spreadsheets. Lillian passed away 2 years later, just after I graduated college with honors. It was quiet, in her sleep, surrounded by her books. I grieved her with a silent, ferocious intensity that startled me. She was the only harbor I had ever known. The real shock came at the reading of the will. I sat in the lawyer's stuffy office, the air thick with the smell of old paper and leather polish. My parents and Savannah were there, expecting a token amount. The lawyer cleared his throat. Lillian had left the bungalow, and a portfolio of investments valued at just over $160,000, entirely to me. I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't joy, not yet. It was the crushing, terrifying weight of being seen. She hadn't just left me money. She had left me an arsenal, a responsibility. She had given me the escape hatch I'd been trying to build for myself, one double shift at a time. My parents' reaction was not congratulatory. It was immediate and ugly. 160,000, my father repeated, his voice tight. "To you." Evelyn's face pinched, the way it did when she tasted spoiled milk. "Well, that's surprising. I wonder why she felt you needed it more than well. The family." There it was, the implication, that I had somehow manipulated this, that I was hoarding a resource that rightfully belonged to the collective. That night, at the dinner table, the air was sour. "I just don't understand the thinking behind it," Evelyn said, pushing peas around her plate. Lillian knew we were stretched, with Savannah's recovery. Savannah, who had been silent, finally looked up, her eyes wide and suddenly wet. She must have thought I was a lost cause. And just like that, I was the villain. My inheritance was not a gift. It was a judgment Lillian had passed on Savannah, and I was the beneficiary of the insult. Charles just shook his head, his disappointment a tangible thing in the room. "That money could have stabilized this whole family. Noelle, you need to think about what's right." They weren't asking. They were informing. Savannah looked at me with a new, assessing gaze. I was no longer just the rigid older sister. I was a bank. That look settled it. I couldn't stay. I wasn't just cleaning up their messes anymore. I was now expected to finance their future ones. Lillian hadn't given me a safety net. She had given me a catapult. I liquidated the portfolio. I sold the bungalow, a painful decision, the scent of sandalwood and tea clinging to the empty rooms, but I couldn't let my parents' resentment take root in her garden. I packed 2 suitcases, my laminated 5-year plan, and the cashier's check. I didn't just leave town. I surgically removed myself. I moved 3 states away, to a city where no one knew my name or my family's unspoken rules. I found a small, sterile office with a good internet connection and a view of a brick wall. I cashed the check, and with Lillian's quiet faith echoing in my ears, I made the only bet that had ever mattered. I bet on myself. I filed the papers for Riverton Scaleworks, the river, because it moves forward, scale, because it implies growth, works, because that is all I have ever known how to do. The first year was a blur of fluorescent lighting and bad coffee. Lillian's money wasn't a safety net. It was ammunition, and I was firing every round just to stay upright. 18-hour days were the standard. Sleep was a luxury, scheduled between proposal drafts and debugging client portals. My apartment was a concrete box with a mattress on the floor. My diet consisted of instant ramen and the metallic taste of panic. I learned the difference between no, which was a slammed door, and not yet, which was a polite email that meant the same thing. I collected hundreds of no's. The phone felt like it weighed 50 pounds every time I cold called. I wasn't fueled by passion. Passion is for hobbies. I was fueled by discipline. Survival is for business. I was building my fortress, and I was laying the foundation with my own exhaustion. My first yes wasn't a corporation. It was Rosalind's Pastries, a family bakery drowning in their own success. Their inventory system was handwritten on legal pads, stacked in a humid back office that smelled of yeast and burnt sugar. They were losing money on spoiled cream and wasted dough. I sat in their office for 3 days, just watching. Before I wrote a single line of code, I built them a simple tracking system. I optimized their supply chain. I saved them 40 hours a week and cut their waste by 30%. My first check had flour dust on it. I held it in my hands, and for the first time, I felt real. I wasn't Evelyn's rigid daughter or Savannah's resentful sister. I was a professional. I was the founder of Riverton Scaleworks. After Rosalind's came a hardware store chain, then a small logistics firm. I wasn't an empire builder. I was a plumber. I found the leaks in their processes, and I fixed them. By the end of year 2, the spreadsheet balanced. The red ink finally turned black. I broke even. By year 3, I was drowning. But this time, it was in contracts, not debt. I couldn't be the analyst, the CEO, and the janitor anymore. I needed a team. My first hire was Maya Ortiz. She walked into the interview at my tiny, sterile office wearing bright red glasses, took one look at my meticulously color-coded whiteboard, and said, "God, you really like spreadsheets. We should talk about pivot tables." She was everything I wasn't: effusive, messy, radiating a chaotic warmth, but her mind was as sharp and organized as mine. She became my operations manager, my reality check, and the first person since Lillian who saw my structure as a strength, not a sickness. "You're the architect, boss," she'd say, tapping her pen. "I'm just the one who makes sure the drywall goes up." She was loyal, fiercely. I met Graham Whitaker at a client meeting. Riverton was streamlining the hardware store chain, and he was their director of infrastructure, where my client meetings were often chaotic, with executives posturing or resisting change. Graham was still. He was a man defined by a lack of noise. He sat at the back of the conference room, listened while his colleagues argued, and then, in a quiet, steady voice, he would ask the one question that cut through all the posturing. He was efficient. He was trustworthy. He didn't flatter me, which I distrusted, and he didn't challenge my authority, which I despised. He simply met it. Our relationship started in the safest way I knew how: shop talk. We'd grab coffee after a grueling integration meeting. "Their legacy system is a complete nightmare." "Isn't it?" he'd murmur, and I'd nod. We didn't talk about feelings. We talked about workflows, data migration, and server capacity. It was the only language of intimacy I trusted. But shop talk eventually turned into dinner. Dinner turned into weekend hikes, where the silence between us was as comfortable as the conversation. He didn't push me to talk about my family. He didn't seem to need anything from me. He just walked beside me. Noelle Hart, who had weaponized perfection and laminated 5-year plans, was learning how to simply be. I was learning to breathe air that didn't smell like bleach or burnt coffee. He proposed 9 months later, on a windy cliff overlooking the gray, choppy expanse of the ocean. The wind was so loud it stole our words. He didn't get on one knee. That wasn't his style. He just grabbed my hand, his grip firm. "You're the most solid person I've ever met. Noelle," he shouted over the roar of the surf. "I want to build something solid with you." Solid, rock, trellis. The words resonated deep inside me. He wasn't promising me a fantasy. He was promising me structure. He was promising me a shared foundation. I said yes. I finally believed my life was in balance. The past was partitioned off. The future was optimized. We had a small wedding, by a lake, 20 guests. Maya was my maid of honor and cried through the entire brief ceremony. I didn't want the spectacle. I just wanted the contract. I paid for my parents' flights. Of course, it was easier than arguing. My mother, Evelyn, smiled at the 3-tier cake, a minimalist design of white buttercream and a single cascade of sugar flowers. "It's a beautiful cake, Noelle," she said, squeezing my arm, her rings cold against my skin. Savannah would have loved this. Even here, 3 states away, at my own wedding, the ghost, the old familiar pinprick, the reminder that my achievements, my choices, my very life, was just a backdrop for my sister's preferences. I smiled, kissed her cheek, and turned back to my new husband. "It's perfect," I said to Graham. And I meant it. The balance lasted exactly 3 months. Graham's hardware company, the one we had consulted for, was acquired by a massive, faceless conglomerate. The new owners restructured, which is a polite word for gutted. Graham's entire division was eliminated. He came home on a Tuesday afternoon, carrying the proverbial cardboard box. He was still calm, but it was a brittle, sharp-edged calm. He hated instability. He was a man who needed a purpose. Riverton, meanwhile, was scaling too fast. Maya was brilliant at managing the clients, but our internal processes were starting to crack under the strain. We needed high-level operational oversight. We needed someone to manage our vendors, negotiate our service-level agreements (SLAs), and build the internal infrastructure to support the growth I was chasing. It was logical. "Come work with me," I said over dinner that night. "Not for me? With me? Director of Operations. You already know the business model. You know our systems." He looked at me for a long time, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Noelle, husband and wife, boss and employee, that's messy." "We're not messy," I replied, my voice firm. "We're efficient. We're solid. We set boundaries, ironclad." He was an employee, not a partner in the firm. He signed the same employment contract as Maya, including a non-disclosure and a non-compete. I was his boss. We agreed no shop talk after 8 p.m. We would be professional. It was the only way I knew how to merge my 2 worlds. It didn't just work. It exploded. Graham was meticulous. He was born to optimize. He renegotiated our cloud services contract, saving us 30% in the first quarter. He standardized our client onboarding process, cutting integration time in half. He managed our vendors with a quiet ruthlessness that I deeply respected. He took all the internal chaos, all the leaking pipes, and he systemized them. The company scaled. Our revenue doubled, then doubled again. He was the engine. I was the navigator. With Graham handling the day-to-day operations and Maya handling the client-facing teams, I was finally free to hunt. I started traveling, pitches in Chicago, meetings in Austin. I was mapping out Riverton's expansion into 2 new states. I was on a plane twice a week. I was busy. I was successful. I was secure. I had built the perfect, impenetrable life. I had forgotten the most important rule of structural engineering. The flaw is never in the brick. It's in the mortar. The phone rang at 10:17 p.m., a Tuesday. I was in my home office, reconciling travel receipts from the Chicago expansion trip. Graham was in the living room. The low murmur of a baseball game a comfortable backdrop. Our 8 p.m. rule was sacred, but I always cheated, needing the quiet precision of numbers to end my day. The screen lit up Evelyn Hart. My stomach didn't just tighten. It clenched, like a fist. We hadn't spoken in 6 weeks, not since I had politely, but firmly, declined to fund my father's latest can't-miss real estate venture. A call this late, from her, was never good news. It was a summons. I let it ring twice more before picking up. "Hi, Mom? Noelle? Oh, thank God." Her voice was a performance of strained fragility. I recognized it instantly. This was her crisis voice, the one she used when the situation required my resources, but not my opinion. "It's Savannah. She needs you." I leaned back, the leather of my expensive office chair groaning in protest. "Here it comes." "What does she need, Mom?" She's really changing. Noelle, I mean it this time. She's really trying." I stayed silent. Trying was Savannah's permanent state of being. It was the follow-through that never materialized. "She's been clean for over a year," Evelyn continued, the pace of her words accelerating. "She's been going to meetings. She needs a chance. A real one. A fresh start. Away from here. All the old influences." "Get to the point, Mom." There was a sharp, offended intake of breath. "She needs a job. I want you to give her a job. At your company." My no was reflexive. A muscle memory honed over 2 decades. "Absolutely not. I'm running a business, not a rehabilitation center. Do you remember the credit cards, the collection agencies, the cleanup I had to manage right before I left?" "I remember you chose your inheritance over your family," she snapped, the fragility vanishing, replaced by the familiar sharp edge of her resentment. "This is your sister. She has nowhere else to go. She's family, Noelle, and family helps family. Or have you become so successful you've forgotten what that means?" There it was, the weapon she had wielded my entire life. The moral imperative, designed to paint me as the cold, rigid, unfeeling one. I was 10 years old again, standing over the shards of a vase I never touched. "That's emotional blackmail, and you know it," I said, my voice low and cold. "It's the truth. I'm asking you to give your sister a chance. She is begging for it." "The answer is no." I hung up. The silence of the office was absolute. I was shaking, not with rage, but with the sheer exhaustion of having to fight the same battle, over and over. I walked into the living room. Graham looked up from the game, his expression open and calm. He was the anchor of this life, the solid ground. He muted the TV. "You look like you just saw a ghost." "Worse, my mother." I explained the demand. I expected him to shake his head, to laugh at the absurdity of it, to validate my refusal. I expected him to be on my side. Instead, he frowned, setting his glass on the coaster. "She's your sister, Noelle." "That's not a resume credential," I countered. "But family helps family, I mean. Your mother isn't entirely wrong. Is she—" A cold prickle started at the base of my spine. "Graham, you don't know them. You don't know what she is. She's not troubled. She's a black hole. She pulls everything in." "Or maybe," he said, his voice maddeningly reasonable, "she's just someone who's made a lifetime of mistakes and finally needs a hand up. You are in a position to offer one. We need an administrative assistant, don't we? Maya is swamped with scheduling." I stared at him. It was the first time his logic had ever felt like a betrayal. "You're serious. You want to hire her?" "I'm saying, why not a probation 3 months, 90 days? He was leaning forward now, in problem-solving mode. He was the director of operations, and this was an operational problem. Set clear, measurable metrics, define the KPIs. If she fails, and you've done your part. If she succeeds, you've helped your family. It's a low-risk, high-reward proposition. He was using my language, metrics, KPIs, proposition. He was packaging my family's dysfunction into a business proposal, and it was brilliant. It was also terrifying. He was supposed to be my firewall, the one person shielded from their particular brand of toxicity. Now he was building a bridge for it, right into the heart of my fortress. It's not low risk, Graham. It's her. It's 90 days, he repeated, his voice gentle. What are you so afraid of? That question hung in the air, heavy and damning. He didn't get it. He saw a logistical problem. I saw an existential threat. But he had also, without realizing it, taken their side. If I said no now, I wasn't just the cold sister. I was the unreasonable wife. He had, with his calm, steady logic, checkmated me. Fine, I said. The word tasted like ash. 90 days. Probation. I'll fly her out. I'll interview her. Savannah flew in 2 days later. My corporate card paid for the flight. She didn't walk into the Riverton office. She made an entrance. This wasn't the Savannah I knew. The one I remembered had smudged eyeliner, torn jeans, and the sour scent of desperation and cheap vodka. This woman was a stranger. She wore a navy blue blazer that was slightly too large in the shoulders, a pressed white shell top, and perfectly creased charcoal gray slacks. Her blonde hair, usually a chaotic halo, was pulled back into a severe, tight bun at the nape of her neck. She looked like a cut-rate imitation of me. Noelle, she said, her voice low and steady. She didn't try to hug me. She offered a firm, dry handshake. Thank you for this opportunity. The performance was flawless. Graham, who insisted on sitting in on the interview, to be a neutral third party, smiled warmly at her. I felt my skin crawl. We sat in the glass-walled conference room. I kept it formal. Tell me about your experience. She slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was printed on heavy, cream-colored bond paper. Her resume, it was sparse. But under education, it listed a business administration certificate from a community college back home. I know I have a lot to make up for, she said, her eyes fixed on Graham. Not me. I lost my way for a long time. I was sensitive. That word, that old familiar excuse. But this program, she continued, it gave me structure. I'm proficient in QuickBooks, Salesforce, and the full Microsoft Office suite. I'm organized. I'm reliable. I type 90 words a minute. I just need someone to believe in me, to give me a single chance. The air hummed. It was the scent of danger, faint and sweet, like a gas leak. She was good. The terminology was correct. The posture was humble. The desperation was perfectly measured. I tapped the resume. This certificate, when did you complete this? Last month. I graduated with honors, she said, a small, proud smile playing on her lips. It felt wrong, utterly, fundamentally wrong. It was too polished. This transformation was too complete. My instincts, the ones that had built this company from a pile of Lillian's money and my own grit, were screaming, a high-pitched siren in my skull. Graham cleared his throat, breaking the silence. I think she's a very strong candidate for the admin role. Noelle? She presents well, and she clearly has the technical skills we need for the front desk. I looked from his earnest, trusting face to Savannah's carefully constructed mask of repentance. I was flanked, trapped by my husband's goodwill and my sister's act. You're hired, I said. The words felt foreign, forced. It is a 90-day probationary period. Your title is Administrative Coordinator. You will report directly to Graham. This was my one concession, my strategic containment. I would not manage her. I would not be in her daily workflow. Graham, who advocated for her, could be her keeper. He was the director of operations. She would be his logistical problem, not mine. I would isolate the infection. Your duties, I continued, sliding the official job description across the table, are as follows: managing the main phone line and switchboard, executive scheduling for Maya and myself, data entry, and processing all incoming expense reports for initial approval. Your KPIs are clear 98% scheduling accuracy, 24-hour response time on internal requests, and 0 client complaints on the phone log. Do you understand? She nodded, her expression sober and serious. I understand completely. I won't let you down. Noelle, or you, Graham. The first week was unnerving. Savannah was perfect. She arrived at 8:30 a.m. every morning, half an hour before she was due. She left at 5:30 p.m., half an hour after everyone else. Her voice on the phone was a marvel, a warm, empathetic, and ultra-competent sound that charmed everyone. Whoever your new receptionist is, Noelle, she's fantastic. One of my biggest clients, the CEO of the hardware chain, told me over the phone. She handled my rescheduling nightmare in 5 minutes flat. A real pro. Even Maya, my cynical, brilliant Maya, was impressed. Gotta say, boss, your sister is killing it. She reorganized the digital archives in 2 days. That was a 2-month project for me. I don't know where you found her. She's family, I said, the word feeling flat. Savannah was efficient. She was polite. She was invisible until you needed her, and then she was indispensable. The tension in my shoulders, however, had turned into a permanent steel rod. It was all wrong. This wasn't change. It was camouflage. It came to a head on Thursday night. At the end of her first week, Graham and I were at home, in the kitchen, observing the 8 p.m. rule. I was chopping carrots for a salad. He was pouring 2 glasses of wine. You know, he said, his voice casual as he handed me a glass, you were completely wrong about Savannah. I stopped chopping. The knife paused, mid-air. Oh, she's incredible. She's not just an admin, Noelle. She has a real instinct for this. My hand tightened on the knife. An instinct for filing. No, for the business. For operations. He took a sip of wine, his eyes bright. She's been asking questions. Smart questions. About our vendor contracts. About the SLAs I've been renegotiating. She pointed out an overlap in 2 of our software licenses that's costing us $12,000 a year. 12 grand? Noelle, he laughed. A short, impressed sound. I've been staring at those contracts for 6 months. I didn't even see it. She's wasted at the front desk. The woman is gifted. Truly. There it was. Gifted. The same word. The same awestruck tone my parents used when she'd finger-painted a passable sunset at age 6. Sensitive, passionate, gifted. He saw a prodigy. I saw a predator who had just learned the local language. I forced a smile. It felt like stretching cold skin over a frame that was too large. That's great. Graham, I'm glad she's working out. He smiled, satisfied, and turned back to the counter. She really is. I turned back to the cutting board. My stomach was a cold, hard knot. The problem wasn't that Savannah was performing. The problem was that my husband, my solid rock, was the one leading the applause. It wasn't just too good to be true. It was a declaration of intent. The invasion hadn't been repelled. It had just been welcomed through the front gate by the head of my security. And he had no idea he'd just handed her the keys to the entire fortress. We landed the Midwest logistics contract on a Wednesday. It was the largest deal in Riverton's history. The one that meant the Austin expansion wasn't just a dream, it was a necessity. It meant we were no longer a boutique consultancy. We were a regional player. We celebrated. I ordered champagne and catering for the whole office. The energy was electric, a validation of 4 years of relentless, grinding work. I circulated, glass in hand, my face aching from smiling. I thanked the data team. I toasted Maya, who was already mapping out the new staffing requirements. I scanned the room for Graham, my husband, my partner in this. I wanted to share that one look of, we did it, that only we could. He wasn't with the clients. He wasn't with Maya or the senior analysts. My camera panned past the laughing groups and zoomed in. He was at the bar, in the corner, tucked away from the main flow, and he was with Savannah. It wasn't just that they were talking. His back was angled, creating a wall between them and the room. He was leaning in, his head bent toward hers. that solid, dependable profile of his softened by the low light. He laughed, a low, private rumble that I felt more than heard, a sound that hadn't been directed at me in months. Savannah's hand was resting on the polished bar top, her fingers splayed, just an inch from his. She was smiling up at him, not her professional admin smile, but something else, something soft and proprietary. A cold, sharp object pierced the warmth of the champagne. I started walking. My approach was a tracking shot. The noise of the party seemed to fade, the peripheral vision blurring. As I neared, Graham straightened. He saw me. His smile didn't vanish. It froze, just for a fraction of a second, before reconfiguring itself into a broader, public version. Savannah turned. Her eyes met mine. The soft, knowing smile she'd had for Graham remained for one beat too long. And then, as if pulling a heavy drape, it was replaced by the bright, efficient look of the perfect employee. "Noel, congratulations," she chirped, raising her glass. "We were just discussing the server load for the new client," Graham said. His voice was too loud, too cheerful. Savannah had a great idea about phasing the data migration to save on bandwidth. "On a Saturday, no less," Savannah added, still smiling. "We'll do whatever it takes." My stomach, which had been in a cold knot since she'd arrived, now felt like it had swallowed ice. I looked at the glass of champagne in my hand. "That's efficient," I said. "Graham, the client team is looking for you. They want to toast the ops director." "Right, of course." He touched my arm, a fleeting, cool gesture, and moved away. I was left with Savannah. "You've really impressed him," I said. "He's a wonderful mentor," she replied, her eyes clear and guileless. "I'm learning so much. It's amazing what you've both built." She was perfect, not a single flaw in the performance, and that was the most terrifying thing of all. The party broke something open. The vague, instinctive unease I'd felt, the too good to be true, had just been given a visual anchor. The handheld camera was shaking now, and I couldn't steady it. I started seeing things, little things, glitches in the matrix. Hector Doyle, our head of security, was the first. Hector was ex-Portland PD, a man who believed in chain of command and direct eye contact. He was my guy, hired before Graham, loyal to Riverton and to me. The Monday after the party, I passed him in the main corridor. "Morning, Hector," I said. "How was your weekend?" He turned, his face impassive. "Ma'am." He nodded, but his eyes flicked to my left shoulder, then to the floor, then back to his radio. He didn't make contact. He avoided my gaze. My blood stopped. "Everything okay with the night sweeps?" "All clear, ma'am. Systems nominal." "Excuse me." He brushed past me, suddenly focused on a non-existent threat down the hall. "Cops know. Ex-cops always know. They see things civilians don't. They see behavior. They see what doesn't fit." And Hector Doyle, my rock of security, could no longer look me in the eye. That night, I started looking, not at feelings, but at data. I pulled the weekly operational summaries Graham prepared for me. They were usually dense, technical, and focused on his high-level negotiations. The reports from the last 6 weeks were different. The name Savannah was everywhere. Week 3. Vendor invoice discrepancy identified. S. Heart. Week 4 new client onboarding packet redesigned. S. Heart. Week 5 coordinated with legal on new SLA template. S. Heart. Week 6 project physical archive digitization. S. Heart handling. This was not the work of an administrative coordinator. This was the work of a project manager, of an operations associate. She wasn't just answering phones. She was being integrated, woven into the very fabric of the company's backend. By my husband, I opened our corporate Slack. The operations channel was clean, professional, but the interactions had a new flavor. It wasn't just Graham delegating, it was them collaborating. Graham, Savannah. "Did you get that vendor file, Savannah Graham?" "Yes." It's more complicated than we thought. I'm cross-referencing the POs now. Graham, knew you'd see it. Let me know what you find. Savannah Graham. I'll need your director-level override for the archive software. Graham sending. You're a lifesaver. It was the tone, the easy intimacy, the shared assumptions. I clicked on their profiles. Their status lights were almost always in sync. Both green, both active. Long after Maya and the rest of the team had logged off for the night, I needed an external processor. I needed Maya. I called her into my office, the glass box, and shut the door. Close it all the way. Her funny, sharp expression sobered. Uh-oh. What's up, boss? I want your honest, off-the-record assessment. How is the new ops dynamic working? Maya leaned against the glass, crossing her arms. She chewed on the end of her red pen. You want Maya honest or employee honest? Maya honest, always. She sighed. It's weird. I can't put my finger on it. She's good, like scary good. She's efficient. She's smart. Clients love her. She's never late. She never makes a mistake. That's the problem. That's the problem, Maya confirmed, her eyes narrowing. It's not human. It's a performance. And Graham, she hesitated. Go on. He's different, she said, lowering her voice, even with the door shut. He used to be this steady, calm force. You know, now he's, I don't know, distracted, fidgety, and he defers to her in weird ways. I asked him about a new hire's security clearance, and he said, check with Savannah. She's handling the new protocols. She's the admin. Noelle, why is she handling security protocols? It's just something's off. The numbers are all up, but the vibe in here is sour. I can't pin it. She didn't have to. She had just confirmed my data. The ground was no longer just tilted. It was actively crumbling beneath my feet. I had to move, but I had to be invisible. Paranoia is a CEO's disease. If I acted on it and was wrong, I would destroy my marriage and my company's morale. A routine email from Hector Doyle landed in my inbox. Subject Q3, Security Upgrades Team. As budgeted. We will be upgrading the server-side storage for all surveillance feeds. We are also installing 2 new high-def cameras in the West Corridor Archive Hall and 1 on the loading bay. Install is scheduled for this Friday. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The Archive Hall, Project Physical Archive Digitization S, Heart Handling. It was a standard upgrade, one I had approved months ago when we were worried about theft in the storage area. It was just timing, I replied. Approved. Proceed as planned. Hector, good initiative. I hit send. The following week, I had to fly to Austin, the final negotiations for our new office lease. I was gone for 48 hours. I hated leaving. It felt like leaving my fortress undefended. I was at the airport, waiting to board, when a new Slack message popped up on my laptop. It was from Savannah. Noelle, just wanted to let you know. I'm going to be staying late tonight to finally tackle that physical archive project. The paper files are a total mess. Graham said it was okay to get a head start. Have a great trip. My hands went cold. The archive hallway, the new cameras, the trip I had to be on. I typed back a single word, acknowledged. When I landed in Austin, I didn't go to the hotel. I went to the co-working space I was using, connected to the secure VPN, and went straight to the finance server. I pulled the expense reports for the last 90 days. Graham's were standard, Maya's were standard, and then there was a new file. Savannah Hart. She had been issued a corporate credit card. Graham had approved it. His signature was on the digital form for minor office supplies and client needs. The charges weren't for supplies. They were for client entertainment. A $120 dinner at Il Forno, a $90 working lunch at the Side Rail, another $150 at Il Forno. They were small, but they were regular, and they were all dated. I cross-referenced the calendar. Every single one corresponded to a night I had been working late or a day I had been out of town. This wasn't an admin. This was a shadow operation. The vibration of my phone on the desk made me jump. My mother. I let it go to voicemail. She immediately called back. I sighed, the exhaustion of it all settling on me like a physical weight, and answered, "Noelle, darling, I was just talking to your father, and we are so proud of Savannah." Her voice was painfully cheerful. "Mom, I'm in the middle of a meeting." "Oh, this will only take a second. She just called. She sounds so wonderful. But, honey, she's working so hard. She told us she's staying late almost every night, reorganizing the whole office for Graham. She's taking on so much. It sounds like she's under a tremendous amount of pressure." The air in the sterile co-working booth felt thin. I knew what was coming next. "She's doing the work of 3 people, Noelle," my mother said, her voice shifting from proud to concerned. "You really need to think about giving her a substantial raise and a real title. She's earned it. Don't you think?" I hung up the phone. The pieces didn't just click into place. They slammed together with the force of a collision. The late nights, the gifted praise from Graham, the access to protocols, the secret expense account, the parental pressure for more money, a new title. This wasn't a job. It was an infiltration, a coordinated, multi-front attack. I sat there, the fluorescent lights of the office humming overhead, the mask of the calm, logical CEO was gone. I was just Noelle, the girl watching the vase shatter, knowing she'd be the one to pay for it. I opened my personal journal, the leather-bound one Graham had given me for our first anniversary. I wrote on a clean page, "If I am wrong, I will apologize. I will admit my paranoia. I will go to counseling. I will fix my marriage and beg my sister for forgiveness. But if I am right, if this is what it looks like, if they are doing this to me, inside my company, then I am not just saving a business, I am saving the only thing I ever built that was truly mine, and I will burn the entire factory to the ground to save it." I didn't sleep in the Austin hotel room. Sleep is a biological function, and I had been reduced to a command terminal. I sat in the sterile silence of the air conditioning, watching the clock on the nightstand tick over to 1:17 a.m. That meant it was 11:17 p.m. back home. The archive room would be dark. My hands were steady. The adrenaline had metabolized, leaving behind a cold, clear, cryogenic calm. I opened my encrypted communications app and dialed Hector Doyle. He answered on the second ring, his voice low and awake. "Ma'am, Hector, I am invoking executive override. I need you to lock your office door." There was a half-second pause, then the distinct, heavy thud of his office deadbolt. "We're secure. Pull the surveillance backups. New camera. West Archive Corridor. I need the footage from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Your time. Tonight." The silence that followed was not one of confusion. It was heavy. It was the sound of a man who had been waiting for a question he never wanted to answer. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice was exhausted, heavy with static. "Are you asking me about a specific incident from tonight, or are you asking me what I already know?" The ice in my veins, which I thought had frozen solid, cracked. "What do you already know?" "Hector, I've had concerns for about 3 months. Since Ms. Hart's probationary period ended. 3 months, her entire employment post-probation, the parties, the trips, the expense reports. My avoidance by him in the hallway wasn't confusion. It was the unbearable weight of his knowledge. "I didn't want to bring you rumor, ma'am," he continued, the ex-cop in him surfacing. "I was building a file, a clean one. You don't act on suspicion. You act on a pattern. They gave me a pattern. The archive cam tonight was just the final data point. Send me the file," I said. My voice was a flat line. "Noelle, it's not. Send it now. Use the encrypted executive channel." The link appeared in my inbox. I clicked. My laptop screen was the only light in the dark hotel room, painting my face in a cold blue-white glow. The file contained 3 video clips. Clip 1, CAM04 Archive Hall, timestamp 21:52. Last night, black and white, grainy, Savannah is standing at a metal filing cabinet. Graham walks into the frame. He doesn't pause. He walks directly to her, places his hands on her waist, and turns her around. She lifts her head. He kisses her. This was not a mistake. This was not a stolen, hesitant lapse in judgment. This was a kiss of deep, established familiarity. It was long and proprietary. He pressed her back against the cabinet, his body shielding hers from the hallway. The timestamp ticked forward. 21:53. 21:54. He grabbed her hand and pulled her. His head tilted back in a silent laugh, into the pitch-black maw of storage room 04B, the one utility closet I'd never bothered to put a camera in. The door clicked shut. The corridor was empty. My lungs stopped, seized. I was not watching a betrayal. I was watching a routine. Clip 2. Cam 09. Parking garage. P2, timestamp 18:30. 3 weeks ago, the date stamp matched my Chicago expansion trip. My flight had departed at 5 p.m. This was Graham's car. Savannah gets into the passenger side. The interior dome light clicks on. They don't leave the parking spot. He leans across the console, and they kiss, his hand tangled in her hair. Clip 3, Cam 01 freight elevator, timestamp 12:15. 6 weeks ago, the date stamp matched my Austin site visit. The elevator doors slide shut. They are alone. Graham immediately, without hesitation, slams the red emergency stop button. The bright red light floods the small space. He turns, crowds her against the elevator wall, and lifts her clean off her feet. The camera angle is high, looking straight down. It is clinical. It is graphic. It is undeniable. I closed the laptop. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the laptop against the wall. The emotional part of my brain, the part that had foolishly believed in balance and solid rock, simply shut down. The fire burned away, leaving nothing but the cold, logical, structural assessment. The infiltration was complete. The system was compromised. The only remaining protocol was a hard reset, a purge. I took the first red-eye flight. I landed at 7:04 a.m. I drove home, the streets slick with morning dew. His car was in the driveway. He was home. I walked into my house. The smell of coffee, the sound of low humming. He was in the kitchen. He was wearing the gray university sweatshirt I had loved on him, the one that made his eyes look warmer. He was stirring pancake batter in a large glass bowl with a wooden spoon, his back to me. "Hey," he said, sensing me. He turned, a bright, easy smile on his face. "Noelle, you're back early. I was just making breakfast. I thought." I held up one hand. I walked past him to the marble kitchen island. I placed my laptop on the counter. I opened it. I turned the screen to face him. I hit play. I didn't play the elevator. I didn't play the car. I played the archive hallway. From last night, the sound of the wooden spoon clattering against the glass bowl was sharp. It slipped from his hand, hitting the tile floor with a wet thwack. A small spray of batter hit his bare ankle in the cabinet. His smile dissolved. The color drained from his face, leaving a sick, ashen gray. He stared at the screen, at himself, at my sister. "Noelle," his voice was a strangled whisper. "Noelle, wait, I can explain this." I finally looked at him, not at my husband, at a liability. "Explain what? Graham?" My voice was quiet, clinical. "Explain you pressing my sister against my company's wall, or explain the $150 charge at Il Forno, designated client entertainment on my company card, time-stamped 3 weeks ago, the night I was in Chicago." His mouth opened, then snapped shut. Panic, pure, animal panic. He had been caught without a script. "Get your things," I said, my voice as flat and cold as the marble. "You have 10 minutes, then Hector will be here to escort you from my property. Noelle, please listen to me." He lunged forward, grabbing my arm. It's Savannah. She's vulnerable." I yanked my arm from his grasp. 10 minutes. I walked into my home office and shut the door. I initiated the termination protocols. I pulled up the 2 letters of termination I had drafted on the plane. Reason: gross misconduct, willful violation of fiduciary duty, and conspiracy to misuse company assets. I e-signed them. I accessed the admin panel for Riverton Scaleworks. Graham Whitaker, access revoked. Key fob deactivated. Corporate cards canceled. Network credentials locked. Email frozen and archived. Savannah Hart access revoked. Key fob deactivated. Corporate card canceled. Network credentials locked. Email frozen and archived. I called Hector. He's home. Execute the offboarding. Both of them. Now. Yes, ma'am. On my way. I watched from my office window, which overlooks the front yard. 5 minutes later, Graham walked out the front door, not with a suitcase, but with a rumpled gym bag. Hector's plain black sedan was idling at the curb. Hector got out. He didn't speak. He just held out a large manila envelope, the termination letter. Graham, his face blotchy and white, snatched it. He got into his own car. He sat there for a full 30 seconds, head against the steering wheel. Before driving away, the purge was clean, surgical. The house was silent for exactly 1 minute. Then my phone rang. Evelyn Hart. I answered. The coldness was gone, replaced by a pure, white-hot, focused rage. Noelle Ann Hart. My mother's voice was a shriek, a sound I hadn't heard in years, thin and vibrating with hysteria. What have you done? Savannah just called me. She's hysterical. You sent a thug to throw her out on the street. How dare you? She was fired for cause. Mom, so was my husband. She is your sister. She is Noelle. You listen to me. You are endangering her pregnancy. The word hit the air and hung there. Pregnancy. It wasn't a pinprick. It was a sledgehammer, the final, missing piece of the plan, the late nights. The client dinners, the fabricated credentials, the coordinated, parental pressure for a raise and a title. This wasn't just an affair. This was a hostile takeover. You have put her under so much stress, my mother screamed, that you could hurt the baby. He's not my problem anymore, I said, and hung up. They arrived 2 hours later. They didn't knock. My father, Charles, used the emergency key I'd given him years ago. The 4 of them, a united front. They walked into my living room like a firing squad. Graham, his eyes red and desperate. Savannah, weeping, her face pale, dressed in a soft, vulnerable-looking pink sweater. My mother, Evelyn, her face a mask of righteous fury. My father, Charles, looking profoundly, deeply disappointed. They arranged themselves on my sofa. A perfect, tragic tableau. Noelle, this has gone far enough, my father began, his voice the one he used for reasonable negotiations. You are upset. We understand that. But you have made a terrible mistake. You fired your family. They made a mistake, I said. I remained standing. They violated their employment contracts. It's over. It's not over. Graham surged to his feet. Noelle, you can't just throw us away. What happened? It was a mistake. But it's real. We love each other. Savannah let out a perfectly timed, choked sob. A mistake? I asked. The freight elevator was a mistake. The parking garage. The archive room last night. You don't understand what you're doing, my mother cried out, standing now. She is carrying your husband's child. You're your family. They were all looking at me. Graham, with a new, strange defiance. My parents, with pity, as if I were the one who was hysterical, as if I were the rigid, cold one, failing to see the larger, more sensitive picture. You're right, I said. I don't think you understand. I walked to the 80-inch smart TV on the wall. I picked up the remote. I tapped my phone to the casting hub. Noelle, what are you doing? Charles asked, his voice suddenly uneasy. I'm clarifying the official record. I hit play. It wasn't the archive hall. It was the freight elevator. High definition, crystal clear. The red emergency stoplight bathed them in a hellish glow as my husband lifted my sister against the wall. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, a strangled noise coming from her throat. My father made a sound like he'd been punched in the gut. Turn it off, Graham whispered, his face white. Noelle, turn it off. I let it play. all 37 seconds. When the elevator doors finally opened, and their flushed, disheveled images vanished, I switched the feed. The parking garage. "This one," I narrated, my voice as calm and steady as a weather report. "Corresponds to my Chicago trip and the Il Forno charge on the company card." "Stop it," Savannah screamed, her voice cracking. "Ugly. You're sick. You're a twisted, sick." I turned the TV off. The room plunged into a thick, suffocating silence. Savannah got to her feet, her whole body shaking. She placed a hand, a trembling, protective hand, on her flat stomach. The tears were real now. Tears of pure, unadulterated rage. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, her voice trembling. 5 weeks. It's Graham's." Graham, my solid rock, my anchor, moved to stand beside her. He took her hand, a perfect, united front. My mother, Evelyn, recovered first. The shock in her eyes hardened, replaced by a familiar, grim determination. She looked at me, not as a mother to a daughter, but as an adversary. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with moral judgment, "it's done." My father stood up, straightening his jacket, reassuming the mantle of the patriarch. "There is a child involved now, Noelle, a child. Your anger, it's irrelevant. You have a responsibility. This is your family. You have to support them. You have to provide for this new family." I looked at them, the 4 of them, my jury. They stood in my living room, on my hardwood floors, having just watched proof of gross professional misconduct, and their unanimous verdict was that I was financially responsible for it. Graham, seeing his solid rock persona had been vaporized by the freight elevator video, shifted. The desperate, pleading husband vanished, replaced by the cold, offended executive. "You can't just do this, Noelle," he said, his voice finding a new, hard edge. "We have rights. I have rights. I built half of this company." "You were an employee, Graham," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "You signed a contract. You were salaried." "I was your chief operating officer," he shouted, stepping forward. "I have vested equity and firing Savannah." He let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Firing her while she's pregnant with my child. That is a textbook wrongful termination suit, pregnancy discrimination. It's open and shut. You'll lose this company. You'll lose everything." My mother, Evelyn, stepped forward, her face a mask of composed, righteous sorrow. The shock from the video was gone. She was on message. "We will testify, Noelle. We will have to. We will tell the court exactly what you've always been." "And what is that, Mom?" "Jealous," she spat, the word a venomous dart. "You've always been pathologically jealous of your sister. You're vindictive. You're unstable. We have years of proof. We will sign affidavits." My father, Charles, nodded, his expression one of profound, weary disappointment. "You forced our hand, Noelle. It's a tragedy, but we have to think of the child." It was breathtaking. The coordination, the extortion. They weren't just demanding I support them. They were dictating the terms of my unconditional surrender. "Pay up, or we will systematically destroy your reputation and your livelihood." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Tears are a biological response to overwhelming pain or relief. I felt neither. I felt, instead, a sudden, cold activation, the part of me that had been dormant the 18-hour day. Instant ramen. Survivalist founder woke up. "Get out," I said. "Noelle, be reasonable." My father started. "This is my property, my company. The terminations are final. Get out." They left, the 4 of them, a united front of the aggrieved. Graham put a protective arm around Savannah's shoulder. My mother shot me a look of pure loathing. The front door clicked shut, plunging the house into a vast, heavy silence. I did not call Maya. I did not call Hector. I did not look at the empty space where my husband used to sit. I picked up my phone. I made one call. Amos Blake was not the lawyer you called for an amicable settlement. He was the lawyer you called when you wanted to salt the earth. His nickname in legal circles was the Scalpel. He didn't just win cases. He surgically dissected the opposition until there was nothing left to put back together. He specialized in high-asset divorce and complex corporate litigation. I was, tragically, the perfect intersection of his expertise. His office was a steel and glass box overlooking the entire city, a monument to unbillable hours. He was a small, immaculate man in a three-piece suit, his posture perfect. I didn't weep in his office. I didn't rage. I presented the data. My husband, who is my COO, has been in a relationship with my sister, who is my administrative coordinator. I have terminated them both for gross misconduct, effective this morning. My sister is now claiming she is 5 weeks pregnant with his child. They are threatening a wrongful termination and pregnancy discrimination suit. My husband is also claiming equity in the company. My parents are threatening to sign affidavits testifying to my historical instability and jealousy to support their case. I slid a simple black USB drive across the polished, mirror-like surface of his desk. That contains the full surveillance footage from the freight elevator, the archive hall, and the parking garage. It also contains the preliminary expense reports I pulled. Amos didn't touch the drive. He just watched me, his eyes dark and impossibly still. He steepled his fingers, leaning forward until his face was just inches from mine. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, and it dropped the temperature in the room by 20 degrees. Ms. Hart-Noel, this is a tragic domestic situation, but a messy affair is just that messy. You fired them for cause. We can defend that. He paused, his gaze intensifying. But I need you to answer one question, and I need you to think like a founder, not like a wife. He leaned in closer. Were you only betrayed maritally? The question, it sliced through the fog of betrayal. Were you only betrayed maritally? I thought of the client entertainment dinners, the gifted praise, the access to security protocols, the constant, coordinated pressure from my parents for a raise and a title, the instinct for the business. No, I said. The word was sharp, clean. No, I wasn't. A small, tight smile touched the corner of Amos's mouth. It was not a kind smile. Good. Then this isn't a divorce. This is a corporate defense. And the best defense, Ms. Hart, is a catastrophic, overwhelming offense. The next hour was not a therapy session. It was a mobilization. You are no longer a wife. You are a plaintiff, Amos said, his voice suddenly fast, clipped. The videos prove the misconduct. They are irrefutable. That neutralizes the wrongful termination claim. The pregnancy is a complication, but the timeline proves the affair predated her announcement of it. She wasn't fired for being pregnant. She was fired for violating her employee handbook in a freight elevator. We are clean there. But they want equity, I said. Graham claims he built half the company. He will try, Amos said. So, we are going to prove he was actively destroying it. He picked up his phone. I am engaging Keaton Price. They are the best forensic accounting firm in the state. They are expensive. They are precise. They are worth it. You will give them full, unrestricted access to your entire system. Tonight, he grabbed a legal pad, his pen flying. The lawyerly rhythm was hypnotic. What's the scope? I asked. The scope is him, Amos said, underlining a word. We're not just looking for the Il Forno dinners. That's petty cash. We are looking for systemic fraud. I want every vendor payment he authorized, every expense report, every reimbursement, every single account that his director-level credentials had authorization over. We are looking for ghosts. Ghosts. Shell vendors. Consulting fees paid to entities that don't exist. Inflated invoices. He was the ops director. He controlled the money flow. He controlled the contracts. If he was this arrogant in his personal life, he was arrogant in his finances. He was providing for his new family before he got caught. My blood ran cold. The instinct for the business. The 12 grand software overlap she'd found. He wasn't finding savings, I whispered. He was finding opportunities. Exactly, Amos said. Now, data integrity, your security head, Hector Doyle. Is he loyal? To me? Yes, completely. Good. He's now your chain of custody manager. I want every server image backed up to an off-site, air-gapped drive. Tonight, I want all logs network. Email. Slack sealed and time-stamped. I want a full chain of custody protocol established on all digital evidence. Nothing gets touched without a sign-off. Keaton Price will interface directly with Hector. My company, I said. The thought of my team, of Maya, making my chest ache. This will leak. It will terrify them. It will leak, Amos agreed. Graham and Savannah will make sure of it. So we get ahead of our own narrative. You are going to appoint an interim COO immediately. Maya Ortiz, my head of client relations. Perfect. You will hold an all-hands meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. You will be calm. You will be transparent, but controlled. You will state that Mr. Whitaker and Miss Hart are no longer with the company. Effective immediately. You will state that, as part of your Q4 goals, you have engaged an independent, external firm to conduct a routine audit of all operational accounts and vendor contracts. This is good corporate governance. You are proactive. They'll be scared, I said. They'll be less scared of an audit than they will be of a massive fraud investigation. You are projecting strength. Noel, you are the captain, steadying the ship. You will not mention the affair. You will not mention the lawsuit. This is a systems upgrade, period. And externally, silence. You say nothing. Your entire company says nothing. We don't comment on internal personnel matters. You will live and breathe that phrase. I nodded. My mind was clear. This was a workflow, a system. This, I understood. One more thing, Amos said, tapping his pen. Hector, I want him to pull every key fob access log and printer log from that archive room for the last 90 days. They were in that room for a reason. Find out what they were looking at. Find out what they were printing. I left Amos's office as the sun was setting. The mobilization was instantaneous. Hector and the Keaton Price team descended on the office like a silent, white-gloved SWAT team. Data was mirrored. Logs were pulled. Servers were isolated. I called Maya. I told her the situation was critical and that I needed her. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just said, I'm on my way. What's the battle plan? When I told her she was interim COO, effective immediately, her response was pure Maya. Well, hell, it's about time I got a raise. I held the 9 a.m. meeting. I looked my team in the eyes. I delivered Amos's script. I saw the fear, the whispered gossip, the speculation, but I also saw Maya, standing beside me, steady. We held the line. The silence lasted for 3 days. It was the heavy, oppressive silence of a Cold War. Then, they fired the first public shot. Graham and Savannah, having clearly found their own lawyer, filed their lawsuit. My phone exploded with alerts. A local business journal fed an anonymous tip, ran the story. The headline was a masterpiece of half-truth, designed to inflict maximum damage. Riverton Scale Works, founder fires. Pregnant sister, COO, husband in jealous rage. My face, my company's name, jealous rage. The article quoted an anonymous source close to the family, clearly my mother, who spoke of my long history of instability and deep-seated jealousy of my sister. It painted Graham as the brilliant COO who had scaled the company to new heights, only to be cruelly dismissed. It painted Savannah as the innocent victim, pregnant and afraid for her future. The war was no longer internal, it was public, and I was, officially, the villain. I sat at my desk, the article glowing on my screen. I read the poison. My hand went to the phone to call Amos, to rage, to scream. Then I stopped. I opened my email. A new message had arrived, 2 minutes earlier, from Keaton Price Forensic Accounting. Subject preliminary findings. Vendor file. S.H. Consulting. Ms. Hart, we have found the first ghost. I closed the news article. The rage was a luxury. The noise was irrelevant. They had just brought affidavits to a data fight. The news article was poison. I was the villain. But I didn't have time for their narrative. I had my own. It was attached to an email from Keaton Price, and it was titled, Preliminary Findings. I opened the document. The first page was a simple flowchart. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The onion peeling began. Each layer was more acrid, more toxic than the last. Layer 1, the ghost. The ghost was a vendor named S.H. Consulting. The invoices were professionally designed, complete with a logo, a stylized S and H intertwined. The services listed were vague but plausible. Q3 Operational Strategy Review. Vendor Contract Optimization Analysis. They were all for flat fees, just under the $10,000 threshold that would have required my secondary sign-off. Graham, as COO, had approved every single one. The payments, a steady $9,500 a month, began exactly 60 days after Savannah was hired. They were wired to a business bank account. Keaton Price had pulled the incorporation papers for S.H. Consulting. It was a shell LLC, registered to a PO. Box. The sole signatory on the bank account was listed as S. Hart. My sister, the administrative coordinator, had a consulting firm, and I was her only client. Layer 2. The family plan. The forensic team didn't stop at the shell company. They followed the money out, every month. Within 48 hours of the $9,500 payment from Riverton, exactly $4,000 was transferred from the S.H. Consulting account into another account, a personal, joint checking account. The names on that account were Charles Hart and Evelyn Hart. My parents. This wasn't just Savannah skimming, this was a family enterprise. A consulting fee for their services in pressuring me, in vouching for her, in providing the emotional cover for the infiltration. My father's demand that I think of the family was not a moral plea, it was a collection notice. Layer 3. The client vacation. The forensic team cross-referenced the client entertainment charges from Savannah's corporate card, the charges Graham had approved with her personal social media, which she had foolishly left public. The $450 charge for couples massage spa day at the Gilded Spa corresponded to an Instagram post of her and Graham, wrapped in white robes, clinking champagne glasses. The caption, Best boyfriend in the world knows how to treat a girl after a long week blessed. The largest charge was for $4,200 at the El Sueño Resort in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. The charge was coded as Off-Site Client Strategy Summit. I had been in Austin, finalizing the lease. Keaton Price pulled the metadata from the resort's publicly tagged photos from that weekend. They found a photo of Graham and Savannah, laughing by a pool, a half-empty pitcher of margaritas between them. The timestamp on the photo's EXIF data was 2:37 p.m. on the Saturday I was working. They weren't just stealing from me. They were vacationing on my dime while I built the company they were gutting. Layer 4. The digital laundry. Graham was arrogant, but he wasn't entirely stupid. Some of the money was harder to trace. The auditors found a series of payments to a legitimate-looking tech services company. The invoices were for emergency data migration services, but the payment method was unusual transfers to a cryptocurrency wallet. The team traced the wallet. It was a complex path, bouncing through mixers designed to obscure the trail, but they found the exit point, a series of cash outs to another bank account, an account under the name Graham Whitaker. He wasn't just embezzling, he was laundering the money, using the language of my own industry as his cover. Layer 5. The lie that opened the door. While the accountants dug, I made a call to the registrar's office at the community college listed on Savannah's resume, the one that had so impressed Graham. The registrar was a helpful, slightly bored-sounding woman. I gave her Savannah's full name and date of birth. I heard the clacking of a keyboard. "I'm sorry," she said after a long pause. "I have no one by that name in our system. Not for the business program. Not for any program. Are you sure you have the right school? Yes, I said. I'm sure. The certificate was a forgery. The entire foundation of her employment, the proof of her transformation, was a complete fabrication. She had walked into my office armed with a lie, and my husband had not only accepted it, he had championed it. Layer 6. The smoking gun email. Hector's team had been busy because Graham and Savannah had used company-issued laptops and phones. All their data was subject to our mobile device management (MDM) policy. Their emails had been archived the moment I terminated them, including the ones they thought they had deleted. Hector's team found it in Graham's deleted folder. An email exchange with my father, Charles Hart, dated 2 months after Savannah started. It was in reply to a question from my father about when he could expect the first payment. Graham's reply was short. Chilling. Charles, the first wire from SH will go through next week. Just remember the story. This is Savannah's consulting fee for her off-the-books strategy work. Don't let Noelle see the statements. She thinks you're struggling. Let's keep it that way. He had conspired with my father to defraud my company and to manipulate my emotions. The disappointed patriarch was a co-conspirator. Layer 7. The contract. Amos Blake had a copy of Graham's employment contract on his desk, highlighted in 3 different colors. When I walked into his office with the new evidence, he just tapped it with a pen. Section 4A Fiduciary Duty, he read, his voice flat. Mr. Whitaker agrees to act at all times in the best interest of Riverton Scaleworks. He is prohibited from self-dealing or engaging in any activity that presents a conflict of interest. He tapped another section. Section 6C, non-compete and non-solicitation, prohibited from establishing or holding a financial interest in any competing or consulting entity during his employment. S.H. Consulting, I said, is a direct, willful, and spectacular breach of his contract. Amos finished. The equity claim he's making, it's not just void, it's fraudulent. Layer 8, the deleted confessions. Hector's final report was the emotional core of the conspiracy. His team had recovered a string of deleted text messages from the company phones. They were a timeline of the entire plot, from Graham to Savannah 1 week before she was hired. Just be the person she expects you to be, but better, humble, eager. Let me handle the rest. This is our one shot. From Savannah to Graham 1 month into her job. He bought it. He thinks I'm a prodigy for finding that software overlap, setting up the SH account tomorrow. From Graham to Savannah the night of the Cabo trip, having a margarita by the pool, paid for by the Austin expansion. To us, to our new family. The evidence was no longer just a collection of facts. It was a story of a calculated, premeditated conspiracy to defraud, embezzle, and ultimately, take control of my company. The pregnancy wasn't a complication. It was their endgame, their leverage. Amos Blake moved like a storm front. He didn't just respond to their lawsuit. He filed a countersuit so massive it made the local news for a second time, this time with a very different headline. The filing was a public document. It was 120 pages of cold, hard evidence: fraud, grand larceny, embezzlement, conspiracy to defraud, breach of fiduciary duty, unauthorized access of computer systems, civil RICO. He named Graham Whitaker. He named Savannah Hart. And as co-conspirators in the fraud, he named Charles and Evelyn Hart. The suit demanded not only the dismissal of their claims, but full restitution of every single dollar stolen, plus punitive damages, interest, and all legal fees. Simultaneously, Amos filed an emergency motion with the court. He attached the bank statements, the wire transfers, the crypto wallet records. He petitioned for an ex parte order to freeze their assets, all of them. The S.H. consulting account, Graham's personal accounts, Savannah's, and the joint account belonging to my parents. The judge, seeing the clear and present risk that they would move or hide the stolen funds, signed the temporary order. Within 24 hours, their bank accounts were frozen solid. Their credit cards were declined. The financial engine of their new life seized up completely. The final step was the coldest. Amos compiled the entire file, the forensic accounting report, the surveillance videos, the forged certificate, the emails, the recovered text messages into a single, neat, devastating package. He didn't send it to their lawyer. He had a courier deliver it, by hand, to the office of the chief prosecutor for the county district attorney. The cover letter was simple. To whom it may concern, enclosed, please find evidence pertaining to potential felony financial crimes committed against my client. Riverton Scale Works. We trust you will find this matter worthy of your immediate attention. This was no longer a messy divorce. It was no longer a wrongful termination suit. It was a crime scene. And I was done being the victim. I was now the primary witness for the prosecution. A courtroom is a theater. It is not a place for truth. It is a place for performance. The side with the most compelling narrative wins. They understood this. They walked in on the first day of the civil trial as a cast, perfectly costumed for their roles. Savannah was the victim. She wore a pale gray maternity dress that was just loose enough to hint at her stomach, which she held with a delicate, trembling hand. Her hair was pulled back, her face scrubbed clean of makeup, making her eyes look larger, more vulnerable. Graham was the protector. He had grown a somber, short beard. He wore a suit that was slightly too large, as if he had lost weight from the stress of it all. He held Savannah's other hand, his jaw set, his gaze fixed on the judge with an air of wronged, protective masculinity. And in the gallery, in the front row directly behind them, were Evelyn and Charles Hart, the grieving parents. My mother clutched a wad of tissues. My father stared at me, his face a mask of profound, public disappointment. Their lawyer, a slick man with a voice like warm oil, began his opening statement. His performance was magnificent. He painted a picture not of a complex corporate entity, but of a dysfunctional family kitchen. This is not, he said, pacing in front of the jury box, a case about contracts and data. This is a case about jealousy, a case about a lifelong, bitter, cold-hearted rivalry. His hand gestured toward me. I sat beside Amos, my back straight, my hands folded on the table. That woman, he said, his voice dropping. Noelle Hart is a brilliant businesswoman. No one disputes that. But she is a cold woman, a woman who, since childhood, has resented her younger, warmer, sensitive sister, a woman who, upon learning her sister had finally found happiness with the very man Noelle could never truly connect with, did not celebrate. She retaliated. He let the word hang in the air. She used the full, crushing power of her corporation not just to fire them, he boomed, but to destroy them. And why? Why this crusade? He walked over to Savannah. He looked down at her, his voice softening to a paternal murmur. Because of this, because of a baby. She found out her sister was pregnant, and in a fit of jealous rage, she terminated them both, violating her sister's most basic rights as a pregnant woman, leaving her and her new family with nothing. The jury looked at me. I was the ice queen, the barren, jealous sister, the corporate monster. I could see the narrative taking root. I was the Ming vase, and Savannah was the hard candy. I was the one to blame. When it was my turn to take the stand for the initial deposition, their lawyer circled. Ms. Hart, isn't it true you flew back from Austin on a red-eye, confronted your husband, and fired them both in the span of 1 hour? I terminated their employment, yes. And you did this after discovering their romantic relationship. I terminated them for gross misconduct, breach of fiduciary duty, and misuse of company assets. Misuse, you mean a personal relationship. I mean financial malfeasance. So, you're claiming the timing of the firing, just days before my client was going to announce her pregnancy, was a coincidence. I was not aware of her pregnancy at the time of termination, I said, my voice flat, calm. I was made aware of it after the termination, when they arrived at my home to demand financial support. So you deny this was about the baby, he pressed, his voice rising in disbelief. I am stating, under oath, that the termination was the direct result of a pattern of professional misconduct and financial crimes. Savannah, on cue, let out a choked, tearing sob. She swayed, and Graham had to steady her. She put her hand to her head. I can't, she whispered, loud enough for the first row of the jury to hear. The stress, it's not safe. The stress. Her lawyer immediately requested a recess, citing undue distress to his pregnant client. The judge granted it. The jury filed out, several of them shooting me looks of open disgust. They had seen the performance. A fragile, pregnant woman collapsing under the cold cross-examination of her heartless sister. Amos Blake didn't flinch. He just sat at our table, meticulously straightening his legal pads. Good, he murmured, almost to himself. Let them perform. Let them set the stage. They hate me, I said, my voice low. They're supposed to, Amos replied, not looking up. Right now, they're watching a family drama. They think they're on jury duty for a daytime soap opera. After lunch, we're changing the channel. We're showing them a bank heist. When we returned, the atmosphere was thick. Savannah was back in her seat, pale, dabbing her eyes. Amos stood up. He did not pace. He did not raise his voice. He walked to the large digital display screen and clicked a button. Your Honor, members of the jury, the plaintiffs would have you believe this is a case about a personal affair. They are correct, in a way, but the affair was not the crime. It was the cover for the crime. A flowchart appeared on the screen. It was the one from the Keaton Price report. This, Amos said, using a laser pointer, is the truth. It begins here. The red dot landed on a box labeled Riverton Scaleworks. And it moves here. The dot traced a line to S.H. Consulting, LLC. And from there, the money splits. Part of it goes here. The dot moved. To a personal checking account belonging to the plaintiff, Ms. Savannah Hart, and the rest, the dot moved again, goes here, to a joint checking account belonging to Mr. Charles and Mrs. Evelyn Hart. The jury was silent. This was not a soap opera. This was math. The plaintiffs have claimed Mr. Whitaker and Miss Hart were fired for a personal relationship. Amos continued, we will now demonstrate, through irrefutable evidence, that they were fired for this. He clicked to the next slide. It was a timeline. On the left, a list of dates. In the middle, a list of financial transactions. On the right, a column titled Associated Activity. February 12th, Amos said. El Sueño Resort, Cabo, a charge of $4,200 to Ms. Hart's corporate card, approved by Mr. Whitaker for a client strategy summit. And here, he played a video, not the elevator, not the hallway. It was the grainy, time-stamped security footage from the resort's public pool area, obtained by our investigators. It showed Graham and Savannah, in swimwear, laughing and drinking from a pitcher. This was the summit, Amos said dryly. The date, you will note, corresponds to a business trip Ms. Hart was taking to secure the very expansion they were billing against. He moved to the next line. February 28th, the Gilded Spa, $450. Client entertainment. Here's the corresponding entertainment. He showed the Instagram photo. He then put the surveillance videos from the office into evidence. But he didn't present them as proof of an affair. He presented them as a breach of security and time. While Ms. Hart was in Chicago, Mr. Whitaker and Ms. Hart were not, as their timesheets claimed. Conducting operational analysis, they were, as you can see, in the freight elevator. They were, as you can see, in the parking garage. The affair is not the issue. The lying about their time, while billing that time to the company, is... The jury was no longer looking at me with pity or disgust. They were leaning forward, their faces rapt. They were following the money. Amos's first witness was not me. It was the registrar from the community college, a pleasant woman in her 50s. Ms. Albright, Amos asked, did you have occasion to search your records for a student named Savannah Hart? I did. And did you find any record of her attending your institution? No, sir. No one by that name, or matching that date of birth, has ever been enrolled. I see. I'd like to enter into evidence Plaintiff's Exhibit B, the resume Ms. Hart submitted to Riverton, and Plaintiff's Exhibit C, the Certificate of Business Administration she provided. He handed them to her. Are these documents issued by your college, Ms.? Albright put on her glasses. She looked at the certificate for a long moment. No, sir. The seal is incorrect, and the signature for the dean is not the dean. This is a forgery. A murmur went through the courtroom. I looked at Savannah. Her face was chalk white. The hand on her stomach was no longer trembling. It was gripping the fabric of her dress. Amos's next witness was the lead forensic accountant from Keaton Price. He spoke for an hour, in a dry, dispassionate monotone, about data integrity. He explained what a hash value was. He explained chain of custody. He explained, in meticulous, excruciating detail, how the server images were taken, how the data was mirrored, and how it was mathematically impossible for the emails, the logs, or the financial records to have been altered by me or anyone else after the fact. The data, he concluded, is pristine. The story it tells is the only one it can tell. Then, Amos brought up the story. He put the email from Graham to my father on the screen. The font was huge. Everyone could read it. Charles, the first wire from Sage will go through next week. Just remember the story. This is Savannah's consulting fee for her off-the-book strategy work. Don't let Noelle see the statements. She thinks you're struggling. Let's keep it that way. Amos let the image sit in the silence. I glanced at my mother. She, who had performed such magnificent, righteous fury, was staring at her own lap. She was not crying. She was, for the first time in her life, perfectly, utterly still. My father was staring at the exit sign. Amos's final witness for the day was Maya Ortiz, my interim COO, my firewall. She walked to the stand, wearing her bright red glasses and a severe black suit. She looked like a professor. Ms. Ortiz, Amos began, you are the interim chief operating officer at Riverton, correct? I am. And before that, you were head of client relations. Were you familiar with the company's accounts payable protocols? I designed half of them, Maya said. Then please, explain to the jury, if an employee, say an administrative coordinator, wanted to submit an invoice for a new vendor, what would the process be? Maya was brilliant. She didn't just answer, she taught. It's a 3-step process. First, the vendor has to be onboarded, which requires a W-9, a master services agreement, and approval from the COO and CEO. Second, any invoice submitted must match a corresponding pre-approved purchase order. Third, any invoice over $5,000 requires 2 signatures to cut the check, the COO and the CEO. That's Ms. Hart. I see. And SH Consulting. Did this vendor have a master services agreement? No. Did its invoices, for $9,500 each, have corresponding purchase orders? No. Did Ms. Hart, the CEO, ever sign off on these payments? No. Then how? Amos asked, his voice soft. Was this vendor paid? Maya looked at Graham, a look of pure clinical disdain. Our investigation found that Mr. Whitaker used his executive-level credentials to bypass the standard queue. He created the vendor profile himself. He approved the invoices himself, and he authorized the wire transfers himself, splitting the payments into 2 smaller amounts to avoid the $10,000 dual signature flag. It was a direct, willful, and frankly, pretty clever breach of every protocol we have. Amos nodded. He looked at the jury. They were not watching a soap opera anymore. They were watching the dissection of a conspiracy. No further questions, Your Honor. The theater was ours now. They had built a stage of tears and maternity dresses. We had countered with a skeleton of forged documents, illegal wire transfers, and irrefutable, time-stamped data. Their performance was over. The autopsy had begun. The day before closing arguments in the civil trial, The world tilted. The district attorney's office, having concluded their own investigation based on Amos's file, unsealed their indictments. It was no longer just my lawsuit. It was the people versus Graham Whitaker and Savannah Hart. The news hit the courthouse like a shockwave. Graham was indicted on 5 counts of felony grand larceny, embezzlement, and computer fraud. Savannah was indicted on 2 counts of conspiracy to defraud and 1 count of forgery for her fake certificate. The air in the courtroom changed. They were no longer the aggrieved plaintiffs in a domestic dispute. They were criminal defendants. Their lawyer, seeing his entire narrative collapsing, became frantic. He filed an emergency motion to have the surveillance videos, the freight elevator, the archive hall excluded. "Your Honor, this evidence is purely prurient," he argued, his voice high and strained. "It is designed only to inflame and prejudice the jury. It is character assassination, not evidence of a financial crime." Amos rose, his voice a cold, quiet counterpoint. "Your Honor, the videos are the timeline. They are the irrefutable proof that an intimate conspiratorial relationship existed. They are the linchpin that connects Mr. Whitaker's financial approvals to Ms. Hart's personal gain. They establish the why of the fraud. Furthermore, they are the single most important piece of evidence in refuting the plaintiff's primary claim that she was fired for being pregnant. The videos prove she was fired for violating corporate conduct in a way that was inextricably linked to the financial conspiracy. They are not prejudicial. They are the entire case." The judge didn't deliberate. The videos establish motive, opportunity, and a direct contradiction to the plaintiff's claims. They are fundamentally relevant. Motion denied. A nail was hammered into the coffin. Amos began his closing argument. He didn't just replay the videos. He was past the shock value. He was on to the data. He projected a new slide onto the courtroom's large screens. It was a visualization of the Riverton server logs. This, members of the jury, is what we call a heat map. It shows login activity to the company's general ledger, the accounting books. Red means high-frequency access. Blue means no access. The map was a calm, cool blue. "This is the ledger's activity during normal business hours," Amos said. "Now, let's overlay my client's travel schedule. Let's look at the dates she was on a plane, expanding her business." He clicked. The screen pulsed. Bright, jagged flares of red appeared, clustered together. "This," Amos said, tapping the screen, "is Graham Whitaker, accessing the ledger at 11:00 p.m. on the night Ms. Hart flew to Chicago. This is him again, at 2:17 a.m., while she was in Austin. He wasn't just approving fake invoices. He was actively, in the dead of night, manipulating the books to hide his tracks. At the exact moments he knew the CEO was 30,000 feet in the air and unable to see the alerts. Nail number 2, he pivoted. The plaintiff, Ms. Hart, and her defense have leaned heavily on the tragedy of her pregnancy. They have used it as both a sword and a shield. But let's look at how the conspirators themselves treated this pregnancy. A new slide, a recovered text message, from Savannah to our mother. "Evelyn, Mom, I need you to make sure Charles calls Noelle about the family stress. I need the consulting fee payment from SH to clear by Tuesday. I have to pay for the ultrasound appointment and the deposit on the new apartment. The air left my lungs. The ultrasound, the sacred, medical proof of her new family was, to them, just another line item, an expense to be covered by the fraud, a tool for their next extortion." Nail number 3. Amos didn't let up. He showed the jury the bank statements, my parents' joint account, the account that had been frozen by the judge's order. Here is the $4,000 wire from S Consulting on March 1st, and here, on March 5th, is their mortgage payment, and here, on April 5th, after the asset freeze, is their mortgage payment returned. Non-sufficient funds. My father, who had projected such profound disappointment in me, was staring at the screen, his face gray. He hadn't just endorsed the fraud. He had bet his own home on it. Nail number 4. Then came the cross-examinations, the finality. Amos called Graham to the stand. He was no longer the defiant protector. He was a defendant, his knuckles white as he gripped the railing. Amos was respectful, almost kind. "Mr. Whitaker, you are a man of process. As COO, you helped design the accounts payable protocols. Did you not?" Yes, I did." "And you understood them. You knew that any invoice required a corresponding pre-approved purchase order, correct?" "Yes." "And you knew," Amos said, his voice dropping, "that the invoices from S.Ch. Consulting, the ones you approved 12 times, had no purchase orders attached. Did you not?" Graham's eyes darted to his lawyer, who sat motionless. It was an oversight. We were moving fast. An oversight. For $9, $500. 12 separate times, Mr. Whitaker. I'll ask you again. Yes or no? Did you knowingly approve invoices that you knew to be in direct violation of the company protocols you yourself helped create? The silence stretched. Graham's pale, clammy skin was visible from my table. "Yes," he whispered. "And you did this," Amos continued, "knowing that S.H. Consulting was a shell company owned by Savannah Hart, the woman you were having an affair with." "Yes." "Was that wrong, Mr. Whitaker?" Graham tried to muster some dignity. He looked at the jury, attempting a mask of contrition. It was wrong. I see that now." Nail number 5. Savannah was next. She was visibly shaking. She held her stomach as she took the oath. Amos was clinical. "Ms. Hart, you testified earlier that the $4 $200 charge at the El Sueño Resort in Mexico was for a business meeting with a potential client." "Yes," she whispered, tears already welling. We were exploring new markets. What was the name of this potential client?" I don't recall. It was confidential." "Was the client's name Margarita?" Amos asked. "Or Poolside Cabana?" "Objection," her lawyer shouted. "Overruled." The judge sighed. "Answer the question, Ms. Hart." It was an informal meeting," she stammered. "Was it as informal as your business administration certificate?" Amos countered, holding up the forgery. "Did you forge this document, Ms. Hart?" She collapsed, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "I don't know. I don't remember he told me to." Nail number 6. Finally, Amos called his last expert witness, an independent business valuator. This was the stake for Graham's civil claim to my company's equity. The expert was dry, academic. We conducted a full valuation. Mr. Whitaker's defense claims his operational management is responsible for the company's 200% revenue growth. Our analysis does not support that. "What does it support?" Amos asked. "The company's growth is overwhelmingly tied to 2 contracts, the Midwest logistics deal and the Austin expansion. Our models show these 2 contracts alone account for 81% of the new revenue. Those strategies and client relationships were initiated and secured by the CEO, Noel Hart. They were in place 18 months ago, before Mr. Whitaker was hired." Graham wasn't the engine. He wasn't even the co-pilot. He was a passenger who had been stealing from the cockpit. The final nail. That night, they requested a settlement conference. It was the first time I had been in a room with all 4 of them since the day I threw them out of my house. They looked small, exhausted, and cheap. Their lawyer spoke. "My clients, Ms. Hart and Mr. Whitaker, are prepared to drop their wrongful termination suit and all claims to any equity in Riverton Scale Works." Amos and I said nothing. We waited. "In exchange," the lawyer continued, his eyes on the table, "Ms. Hart will petition the court to unfreeze their assets and will provide a one-time, non-disclosure family support payment of $500,000 to provide a stable home for the coming child." I looked at them, at the 4 of them, my entire life of being the load-bearing wall. They had been caught, exposed, and indicted. Their reputations were in ruins, their futures in jeopardy, and still, After all of it, they were trying to cash that one last check, the family check. I stood up. No, their lawyer's head snapped up. Ms. Hart, Noel Child, please, my mother whispered, her voice raw. All the performance burned away. It was the first real sound I'd ever heard from her. He's your blood. Please. I looked at her. I looked at my father, a gray, broken man. I looked at Savannah, who was just a hollowed-out, terrified girl. I looked at Graham, the empty shell of the man I thought I'd married. Amos, I said, turning to my lawyer. We're done here. I choose the light. We returned to the courtroom the next morning for the verdict. The air was a vacuum. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. The jury filed in, their faces unreadable. Savannah was rocking, her hand clamped to her stomach. Graham stared at the wood grain of the table in front of him, as if trying to find a pattern. In the gallery, my mother caught my eye. Her face was a ruin of terror and pleading. Her lips formed the words, a silent, desperate plea across the divide. Please, child, don't do this. The bailiff's voice cut through the silence. All rise. We stood. The air in the courtroom was so thin it was barely breathable. My mother's desperate, silent plea hung in the air between us. I met her gaze, held it for 1 second, and then turned my eyes forward, to the judge. He was an older man, with a face that had seen too many narratives. He put on his reading glasses, his movements slow, deliberate. He opened the file. The performance was over. The accounting had begun. I have reviewed the evidence presented by both the plaintiffs and the defendant. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the room, silencing the nervous coughs. I have heard the testimony, and I have reached a verdict. He looked at Graham and Savannah. On the plaintiff's claim of wrongful termination, I find this claim to be entirely without merit. The defendants have provided irrefutable, time-stamped evidence of gross misconduct, repeated and willful violations of the employee handbook, and a clear conspiracy to defraud the company. The terminations were not just warranted, they were a necessary and appropriate response. The claim is dismissed. With prejudice, Savannah let out a small, strangled sound. On the plaintiff's claim of pregnancy discrimination, the judge continued, his eyes zeroing in on Savannah. The court finds this claim to be not only false, but offensive. The evidence clearly shows the conspiratorial relationship and the financial malfeasance began long before the plaintiff's pregnancy. The evidence further shows the termination was executed by the CEO before she was made aware of the pregnancy. The claim that the pregnancy was the reason for the termination is a clear fabrication. It is dismissed, with prejudice. On the plaintiff, Mr. Whitaker's claim to equity in Riverton Scale Works, he said, turning his gaze to Graham. This court is frankly appalled. The plaintiff was not a partner. He was an employee who signed a clear contract. Furthermore, the expert valuation testimony proves his contribution to the company's growth was minimal, but more importantly, his proven, systemic, and malicious breach of his fiduciary duty and his active embezzlement from the company immediately voids any and all claims to equity, bonuses, or vested interest. That claim is dismissed, with prejudice. He paused, letting the silence settle. Graham looked at his hands. He was a ghost. Now, the judge said, we turn to the defendant's countersuit. He looked at me. On the countersuit for fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement against Mr. Whitaker and Ms. Hart, this court finds in favor of the defendant, Noel Hart, on all counts. The evidence is overwhelming. The recovery of stolen funds, totaling $483,000, is hereby ordered. Full restitution is granted, with interest, compounded daily from the date of the first fraudulent transaction. A gasp came from the gallery, from my mother. Furthermore, all legal fees and costs associated with this trial, and the forensic accounting investigation, are to be borne by the plaintiffs. Their suit was frivolous and brought in bad faith. The court affirms the temporary asset freeze, he stated. The accounts of S.H. Consulting Mr. Whitaker, and Ms. Hart, are to be seized and liquidated, with all funds transferred to the defendant until the judgment is satisfied in full. He then looked to the front row, to my parents. As to the co-conspirators, Charles and Evelyn Hart, this court finds them civilly liable for the $48,000 in consulting fees they accepted, knowing it was the fruit of a fraudulent scheme. They are hereby added to the restitution order, jointly and severally. Furthermore, the judge said, his voice turning cold, this court finds both Mr. and Mrs. Hart in contempt of court for the false affidavits they provided regarding Ms. Hart's instability. Their testimony was perjurious, submitted willfully to mislead this court, and to aid in the extortion of their daughter. I am imposing a fine of $10,000 on each of them, due immediately. I heard my mother let out a low, shaking moan. Their house was gone. Their retirement was gone. Finally, the judge looked at me and Graham. On the matter of the divorce, the petition for dissolution of marriage is granted, effective immediately, on the grounds of irreconcilable differences and breach of trust. All claims by Mr. Whitaker for alimony or division of assets are denied. The court recognizes Riverton Scale Works as the sole and separate premarital property of Ms. Hart, protected further by the plaintiff's own fraudulent actions against it. He took his glasses off. He looked at Graham, and the theater was gone. There was only a cold, profound disappointment. Mr. Whitaker, a chief operating officer, holds a position of sacred trust. A fiduciary duty is the highest standard in business. You were given the keys to a kingdom you did not build, and you did not just steal from it. You attempted to burn it down for spare parts, conspiring with the CEO's own family. It is one of the most egregious, personal, and malicious breaches of fiduciary duty this court has ever witnessed. His gaze swept over all of them. You walked into this court demanding support for a new family, but the evidence shows you were not building a family. You were running a criminal enterprise. He picked up his gavel. The room was a tomb. This, he said, is the judgment of the court. The sound of the wood hitting the block was not a sound. It was a physical force. It was the sound of a door slamming shut, the sound of a lock engaging, the sound of a fracture being set. Gavel. It was over. The criminal proceedings were swift. With the civil judgment and the mountain of evidence, there was no trial. Graham, facing the reality of his deleted emails and the heat map of his late-night logins, pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 3 years in state prison. Savannah. Due to her pregnancy and her lesser role, a narrative Amos did not bother to fight, was granted 5 years of probation. The terms were iron. She was barred from holding any job that gave her access to finances. She was subject to strict financial monitoring, and her restitution payments, tied to my judgment, would be garnished from any income she made for the foreseeable future. She was financially chained to me until the last stolen dollar was returned. My parents avoided criminal charges. Amos said the DA felt the intent to defraud was harder to prove than their intent to accept the money. Their punishment was civil. It was financial ruin. In the courtroom, in the moment after the gavel fell, the vacuum exploded. A roar. Reporters burst from the back row, scrambling for the exit. My mother let out a single, sharp, wailing cry. Savannah was sobbing, her face in her hands. Graham just sat there, white, hollow, staring at the seal of the court. I did not look at them. I stood up. I smoothed the lapels of my blazer. Amos Blake leaned in. "It's done, Noelle," he said. I nodded. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel relief. I felt nothing. I felt the absence of a weight. I felt the cool, clean quiet of a system that had finally, successfully, purged its virus. I was autonomous. I turned. I walked down the center aisle. The reporters shouted my name, shoving microphones at my face. "Ms. Hart, how do you feel?" "Noelle, what's your message to your family?" I said nothing. I kept my chin up, my eyes forward. I pushed open the heavy courtroom doors. The noise from the hallway hit me. Maya was standing there. She wasn't holding a comforting cup of coffee. She was holding a blue document folder. She looked relieved, but she was, as always, my COO. She held it out. "The Chicago expansion contract," she said, her voice crisp. "Their legal team just sent back the final red line. It's signed." I took the folder. The weight of it felt good in my hand. It was real. The work was always real. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. The screen lit up. Mom. She was calling. After all of it, after the lies, the fraud, the contempt citation, she was still calling. The old system was still trying to find a connection. I looked at her name. I saw the Ming vase. I saw the sensitive excuses. I saw the family helps family. My thumb moved. I pressed the silence button. The buzzing stopped. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. "Let's go. Maya," I said. "We have an expansion to manage." I turned away from the noise, away from the courtroom, and walked toward the tall glass windows at the end of the hall. The doors slid open, and I stepped out into the cold, bright, unforgiving light of the afternoon. It was clean. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I'd love to connect and hear your thoughts. Please subscribe, like the video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more listeners.